Hi, everybody, and thanks for being here. My name is Doug, and I'm one of the co-founders of Intelligent People. We're a specialist product recruiter with close to 20 years experience recruiting product people up to board level. And we're here today to discuss diversity and inclusion in product management. We're asking what those terms mean and why they matter to businesses. There's a growing understanding that D&I is important, not just morally, but also for business performance. And there's a plethora of data out there to support this. A recent study by Deloitte has shown an inclusive organisation is 2 times as likely to exceed financial targets, 3 times as likely to be high performing, 6 times more likely to be agile and innovative, and 8 times more likely to achieve better business outcomes than a non-inclusive one. However, there does seem to be a disconnect between knowing the importance of D&I versus knowing how to implement. And many organisations have a knee-jerk reaction to D&I, where all of the efforts are dedicated to hiring and inclusion gets forgotten. This leads to a poor employee experience. So it seems apparent it's not enough to just set up occasional employee training schemes and hire diverse employees as a way to check the box. We need to have a greater focus on creating an inclusive culture that's genuine and ongoing. To get to grips with this today, we want to investigate the topics of women in tech with our guest speaker, Deepika Adusamilli. We then want to understand a little more about ethnicity in product management with our guest speaker, Funmi Alasan. And we're going to finish with the impact of D&I on business performance with our guest speaker, Pooja Naidu. Thank you very much, all 3 of you. I'd now like to hand over to my colleague, Jen, who's going to introduce the topic of women in tech. Hi, Jen.
Thanks, Doug. Evening, everyone. As Doug mentioned, I am an Associate Director here at Intelligent People, specialising in product management recruitment. I'm really excited to be here today and discuss with our guests about some key topics and challenges that they are facing as women in tech and product. Before this roundtable, I was doing some reading around some key statistics, one of which was from Statistica stating that women hold 26.5 of executive, senior level and management positions in S&P 500 companies. So it would seem that we have a long way to go and the tech industries are not representative of the society it serves. Alongside this, a report by the National Centre for Women and Information Technology stated there is a large gap at the executive level, where women hold only 11% of leadership positions. However, not all doom and gloom, and we are seeing some improvements. For the first time, women CEOs run more than 10% of the Fortune 500 companies. In addition to this, there is a retention issue for women in tech. More than half women in tech leave the industry by the midpoint in their career. This could be due to weak management support, lack of opportunity, lack of work-life balance, perhaps returning after maternity leave. And I know a lot of tech companies are really keen to display a good work-life balance. But within startups and scale-ups, how realistic is this? This would be a good point to discuss with our guest speakers today. Moving on to some of the current barriers within tech, we know that women in tech are not well represented, but we also know that women of colour are facing additional barriers and discrimination continues to be widespread. A key stat to support this is that only 3% of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are women of colour, which is fairly alarming and also highlights the importance of the discussions this evening. This is also important as products should be built to diversify, which sadly doesn't always seem to be the case. On this subject, I wanted to share an example that particularly stood out to me. This example is actually from one of the biggest global tech giants, Google, where their flagship product, Google Translate, had a problem whereby she wasn't recognisable. Therefore, the default was he. This is quite baffling, to be fair, and does indicate all the work that still needs to be done. So, to get to grips with this topic further, Deepika is joining us today. She is currently First Vice President, Head of Product at King. Evening, Deepika. Great to have you with us. So, it would be great to hear more about yourself and what compelled you to be here today.
I was saying good evening, quite early, I think. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jen, for having me here. Really appreciate it. Just a brief intro. I'm currently the First Vice President and Head of Product at King. I've had a wild product journey for the last 18 years. I've lived and worked in 3 countries. I've had a lot of industries. I've seen a lot of industries in product and how product nuances are different in different industries. It's been quite a ride, and especially working with diverse teams, enabling diverse team has been a huge story, and there is a lot to talk about.
Absolutely, absolutely, and really excited to discuss some of those topics today. So, can I kick off and ask your personal experience of working as a woman within the tech and product industry?
So, as I said, I've been here 18 years. I think starting, just before getting into product as well, before, just being a woman who's been able to do STEM, a girl who's been doing STEM or working in getting into tech industry, working, studying tech and all of that has been quite an experience because it's quite slight in the Western environment. In India, there is a lot of focus around tech and women in tech and all of that. So, from a point of education as well, getting into technology and trying to be able to work into tech either in the US or in the UK has been a very different experience because there's not a lot of women in tech. There's not a lot of women in product, at least when I also started 20 years ago. So the experience has been that I've been probably the only woman in a lot of teams doing tech, or only woman in a lot of teams doing product as well. So to be able to break those barriers, to be able to stand up and to be able to do things a certain way has been a hard journey, especially when there is not a lot of people that you can look at and say, well, there is representation. There's someone who's done this before me. There's someone who's been there before me. And maybe I can look up to them and follow the path. So then there are role models. There've been amazing role models like Indra Nooyi and all the guys out there who become CEOs and stuff. But representation matters. It's been a hard journey to be able to have your voice heard. There is opportunities out there. That's been my experience as a whole.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I think just talking there, you were sort of saying obviously not many women in tech. I suppose an unspoken culture in tech organisations is the idea of the boys' club. Have you experienced this yourself?
Absolutely. There is, I mean, if you just look at how certain industries are organized, right? There is not because, again, it depends on where the companies are situated, located, where the industries have grown. If you look at different industries, I think financial tech or fintech has a lot of diversity because then it has the where the companies are located or industries have been hiring from has been highly evolved. But if you look at different industries like gaming and industries that are evolving to a certain aspect, there's a lot of European influence, and STEM in Europe has been a certain way for a long time. And a lot of these either games or certain type of industries have been built by men. And then there is a banter. There is a certain kind of hired people like us. Naturally, people think when they look at someone and they hire someone like them, they will be able to do the job. There's always a thing when it is always easier to have 10 white men do the job than absolutely bring a diverse person, enable them, include them and hear their diverse voices. And again, there's been a lot of studies, there's been a lot of sort of impact that has shown by having diverse teams. But people think a certain way. They do think that people like me will be easier to work with. People like me are easier to hire. They've shown results in the past. So there is that sort of boys club, sort of banter, sort of who we are. Maybe we do the work better and all of that stuff. But again, it has to change. It has to change in different ways. Women have to support women. There has to be diversity. There has to be mentoring for women to take up different roles. There has to be that inclusion standing up here.
And so you mentioned a few things there, but what can you think? What do you think can be done to try and move away from this boys' club within the tech industry at the moment?
I think we have to start. As I said, if there is a boys' club, there should be a mingling club as well, right? It is also again, let's start from saying that there needs to be support in the women's side of the organization as well. There needs to be women's club, at least at the starting point. We're not saying that things need to go a certain way, but things need to be equal. So maybe you need a few leaders to be able to start supporting women, mentoring women, coaching women to be able to get them into leadership positions or into product with with intent, with looking out for people and all of that stuff. So let's start there. And then you start have to, and then again, it's a mindset change for the company as well, right? So the whole company and teams have to understand that they have to do this with intent, and it's not banter anymore. There is a lot of bias that is not quite visible, and that needs to be addressed, that needs to be toned down, so women can feel comfortable working in these gender-based or boys club kind of societies or companies.
Yeah. And so you mentioned sort of mindset change, and I think that's really interesting and really important. Do you have an opinion on how to kind of implement that? How to really change that mindset?
And mindset needs to change, and mindset sometimes it's so deeply embedded. It's at your sometimes culturally it's at the grass, it's so embedded in the culture, it's a grassroots level, it's at every level, right? So I think the company needs to have an understanding. I think Doug was saying this, diversity to a lot of companies is just about hiring. It's just about a percentage or a stat that people look at as how much diversity have we hired over a certain time. But again, inclusion is extremely important to be able to say that as a company, will not hold. We will hold you liable for a certain kind of action. We will hold you liable for a certain kind of talk. And to be able to provide a culture where women can actually reach out and say, this was not right. Can we change this? It can be a conversation. To be able to, when you implement cultures like this, when you implement things and you talk about them at a leadership level, you talk about them at a company culture level and all of that stuff, things start changing. The mindset may start changing. Again, biases, as I said, are so deep in people's heads. They even today, even now, I get told that I'm not like them, or I get told that I do not speak like maybe any other exec does. So it has to be, and more women in the organization, more women working, more women in product would absolutely change that mindset.
And I just wanted to sort of touch on the idea or perception that women do the glue work. And, glue work can be anything from kind of delivering a feature, finalizing a project, talking to stakeholders, gathering requirements. Obviously, I'm talking more about sort of product lingo here. But it's work that takes time away from doing your actual job, learning new skills and really building your career. And this type of work doesn't feed into consideration for promotion. What are your sort of thoughts around this? Is this something you've experienced?
Absolutely. The amount of glue work I have done in my life to be able to get here, the amount of meetings I've organized, I absolutely feel between my male colleagues and myself, it's always me scheduling the meetings. I could be the boss. I could be a peer. I could be working for them. The amount of meetings I've organized, I don't know if it's just general gender disorganization or it is something that it's always looked upon for the women to do. And also, then, and it happens with peers as well, right? Consistently. Sorry about that. I had muted these. It consistently happens among peers as well. Sometimes it is, and it's not taken into consideration in any of the performance reviews and stuff. There was one time, ages ago, maybe 10 years ago, one of my bosses had told me that I was such a breath of fresh air and I was a social butterfly. I was, how does that actually, is it positive? Is it going to help me grow in my career? But comments like that happen because essentially you end up taking notes so many times. Essentially, it happens because you end up doing a lot of the project work that ends up in the product world. It essentially is a lot of the things that we take on. We are chief of staff for a lot of, just being in the exec team, but still chief of staff to a lot of things that happens in the exec teams. So that is something that I have experienced. I think what do I do for it? I try to put it in the job description for any person who comes in to be able to say, you have to take your glue work. You have to do these things for your team. It is, as a leader, if you're coming into any, product, as you know, is that sort of attitude. It's sort of bringing people together. It's sort of being the change agent into any companies and stuff. So absolutely, there is glue work required as a skill set, but also in your job profile and role profile, is there glue work that is needed? Let's put it in the job description. And if you notice, you always notice that some people in the organization are doing the glue work. So let's reward them. Let's bring that to light and say that these are the team members who have been doing a lot for the team, again, culture wise, inclusion wise, product movement wise, or getting all of that. So let's reward them. Let's bring that to life and say this is real skill set. It does not have to be a woman.
I like that, the rewarding and also putting in job descriptions. That's really interesting. So to kind of moving things on a little bit more, talking about gender pay gap. So we've read that on average, men earn 7% more than women in product. What are your experiences of this? Does that resonate with you?
We are in 2023. And we're absolutely still discussing this. And also, being a woman doing exec roles wise, I'm still not a fit for many roles out there, right? I'm still not a fit because I do have experience, still not a fit. I do not know what that fit word means, but it still happens. And so does gender pay gap. And I think a lot of companies over the last 2 to 3 years have got into a lot of trouble when a lot of audits have happened, at least in Europe, about gender parity and where is it going and all of that stuff. It still happens. It is quite out there. People do think that sometimes men put more hours. It's not about the hours being in a certain role. I think that's changed since the pandemic. People have hybrid way of working. Women have more responsibilities at home as well sometimes. And also kids are involved and all of that. Again, that's a culture where, both parents need to stand up and all of that. But again, the one way that we can sort of addressing gender pay is having transparent salaries, being transparent about your salaries, holding companies good by pay audits that have happened in the past and keep doing that. And also, I know negotiation is extremely hard because, as I said, when, sometimes you're passed away for fit, there's only certain roles and certain teams and certain companies where leaders look a certain way, and then companies are open to hiring diverse leadership as it starts going in. Because of all of that, I think, again, women steer away from negotiating their pay. The one thing I want to say is there's loads of roles out there. Ladies, I am quite scared as well when I say no to a lot of roles because they do not fit me or my pay or what I expect from the companies. It's quite scary, but again, do please negotiate. It's been a hard road for me to learn negotiation, to let go of something that is in my hand because, I expect something else for a leader like myself. But negotiation is extremely hard, but learn it and do not go to companies which do not have transparency in their pay. And look up and see what the pay audits and everything look for that company.
So why do you think women, don't feel that they can negotiate? What do you think the main barrier to that is?
Only from my experience, when certain when you look at like maybe there could be 50 roles out there and 50 executive leadership roles out there. There's a lot of roles which again do discriminate or maybe do not get or not open to a strong female leadership coming into their realm. Or again, as we were talking about, there could be boys club at play. There could be a lot of other things at play where certain roles are off market for you already. And when you are looking for real work, when you're looking for a certain amount of work, when you're looking to grow your career and a certain kind of role comes to you, you do not feel in a place that you can negotiate with it. You think this is what I'm going to get. Let me go with it. Maybe this will really help me and all of that stuff. But again, I would definitely say that's quite old world. Again, maybe that's sometimes what we tell ourselves. That's what I've regularly heard with all the women I mentor, coach on how to may be able to negotiate. Where do you get out there? I've done a lot of that as well. When I was like, take the role, come on, you never know what other role is, might come your way or not come your way in the future. But I've learned my negotiation skills. I've said there's more in the market. I need to be paid for what I'm worth.
Yeah. So moving on to imposter syndrome, this is spoken about, across women in tech. Is that something that you've experienced? Would you be willing to sort of share your experiences with that?
I don't think any of us are born with imposter syndrome to begin with. I think when we start, and it starts at various stages in life, where women have said, maybe you shouldn't be doing this, maybe you should focus on another thing, maybe your priority should be something else. And also lack of representation. When you consistently look at certain members on board, or you look at certain executives, and most of them are male or a certain kind of, or do not have your ethnicity at leadership levels, then you do feel like you're quite different. And also the way you speak, the way you articulate, the way you talk about certain things might not be exactly the same way they would speak about, or maybe articulate. But again, you do have your points, you know what you're doing. And when that sort of representation isn't there, when you do not hear and see people like you, then you go into the imposter syndrome mode, because then you think, am I saying it the right way? Am I putting my point across? Am I doing the right job? Why don't I see people around, like me around me? So maybe, I'm not ready to do this job. Maybe I'm not fit to purpose. So things like this do happen. I have felt imposter syndrome several times, I think basically when I was doing a lot of middle management as well, and I had to do a lot of self work. I had to do a lot of self work on myself as I start getting into prime leadership roles, to be able to say that work on yourself, but when you go out there, do understand that you've put in your work. You've had experience, you've put in your work, you know your stuff. So just go ahead and do it.
So that would be your main advice then, to overcome imposter syndrome.
I think for imposter syndrome, again, you need to have self-awareness. You need to be able to understand where you're going. Are you doing the right thing? Do you have the skill set? If you have the skill set, just go for it. And do tell yourself, yes, you might not speak like every third person in the room, but it's okay. As long as you know what you're doing, you know your strategy, you know where you're going, just go on with it.
Yeah, got it. So you mentioned this earlier, Deepika, the need for women in leadership as role models. And just kind of doing some reading before this roundtable, general industry statistics stated that 92% of 18 to 25-year-old women saying they cannot name a famous person in the industry, versus 46% that can name a prominent man in tech. So from this, it would seem we need more women as role models. We need to be celebrating women's achievements in tech. What role do you think what role do you think role models play in women in tech? What can we do? What more can we do there?
So when I started leadership roles, I did not think I was a role model. I was working very hard. I was getting out there. I did not think I was actually inspiring people to do anything different from, anything they were doing. But again, things started to change, I think, about 2 or 3 years ago for me, when I started going into my meetings, into teams, or I would visit another team in a different country, or then I would do any talks or anything. People would come out to me and say, Deepika, I speak like you. I pause like you. Maybe I think like you. And I did not think that was okay. I did not think that was a leadership quality. And a lot of the times leaders do not look like me in a lot of spaces that these women operate in, right? So I did not think I was inspiring. I did not think people were looking up to me at all. And that started happening. Things started changing. And then I thought, even in my little space, even doing what I'm doing at the moment, even doing, the little things that I do at work, or where my space is, or the little kind of talks or panels or whatever I do, I am bringing a little change about. There was been so many. I remember there was a big conference. I went and spoke at it, and I came down, and there was so many South Asian women who came and said, "I actually, I never thought I would be there, but looking at you, it gives me hope that I could maybe one day stand up there and talk about my work, because I do the work, but I did not know if anyone would ever want to listen to me." So, I mean, the advice I have to give there is like, do your work, talk about it. Do not do not feel the need that there's always people who listen to you. There's always at least one person who's always listening, getting inspired out there, and that is enough. If it, I've heard this quite recently. I mean, if you can help one person, and if you can actually motivate one person to be a leader, to be able to get out there and do things, it's enough.
Yeah, I think, it could be intimidating too for those starting out. And I think, a better idea would be to represent women at all levels of seniority and leadership. How do you suggest that this could be done? Talking about mentorship, could encouraging mentorship work? What role does mentorship play with this, perhaps?
So mentoring is extremely important. Mentoring anyone, women who, want younger women getting into tech or into product, mentoring is extremely important. And also getting mentorship is extremely important. I'm a product of a lot of mentoring. Senior mentoring, people who have been senior in my roles, amazing South Asian women who have helped me, my peer mentoring. Also, there's a lot of peers who help me out day in and day out when I think about things, inspire me, talk me into doing things quite differently. I'm incredibly blessed. But also, I get inspired from all the mentees that I take on and talk to them, because I think they're way smarter. They'll take the world away, but mentoring is a very important tool, and asking for help is extremely important. Find the mentors, and the kind of mentors I've found is not someone who has been in a mentored program. Like, I've not gone into mentoring programs, but I reach out to people if I think I really look up to them and I think that they will help me with a skill set that I haven't had. I reach out to them. 1 in 10 times it works, and I'm not intentionally being shy about it. And then also, if people reach out to me, I do reach out to them and say, this is how I can help you, let's get on with it, and things like that.
Yeah, so an important mentorship, super important in trying to tackle this. So just moving on to a little bit about retention for women, as I sort of touched on in the intro there. How can we promote retention for women, leaving? This might be due to childcare, cost of childcare, other caring responsibilities. Returning after mat leave and entering the job market again can be really fairly daunting. What are your thoughts on this? Is it possible to keep climbing the ladder in product and tech, do you think? And, have you got any sort of main pointers there?
So, I think COVID changed a lot about hybrid working. And then I have actually seen so many women come up to doing product post-COVID, because they can balance after kids, right? I've seen a lot of talent lost, maybe after having 1 or 2 kids, because there is a lot of push around. There was a lot of push around how many hours need to be spent in the workplace, how many people need to be coming to the offices, and all good work mattered on the number of hours you poured in the banks and all of fintech and all of that stuff, right? But I think post-COVID, a lot of that has changed. People are working hybrid. I think enabling hybrid working environment for having diverse talent is extremely important. Having that flexibility goes a mile. And then people can balance their lives, which means that there'll be more diverse talent coming into the business as well. So retention for women, again, I think I see a lot of women who absolutely need to balance work and home, and also a lot of the glue work affects them as well. If you're not looking at everything that women at work are doing on and over their job, recognizing that is extremely important. So I really struggled when I had a kid and I had to go back from mat leave to work. So I had to get a lot of help to be able to do that. I wish I had hybrid working back in the day, where I could actually balance being more there for my child as well as doing other things. So I think hybrid working environment. And also, there's a few members in my team who do a great job about taking the load as fathers as well. They always balance out maternity and paternity leaves. Companies need to provide substantial paternity leaves as well, so both parents can take the lead, and then men can also take the load of working, looking after the kids, and the woman can come back to work.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing a lot about the sort of pattern mat leave as well, and companies really enhancing that as a benefit, which is great to see. So, other than the sort of the childcare and perhaps returning after having a baby, what else do you think could be driving women out of the industry, in your opinion? Do you think it's more than what we've spoken about?
Yeah, it is definitely around. I think the one thing that, while building diverse teams, retaining diverse women, and myself as well, and talking to my peers and across the industry, it is recognizing value. It's recognizing value that women bring to the teams, to be able to understand what they're doing in the business, how to support them to get to the next level, where is the clear path that they need to be able to walk, to be able to understand what they bring to the table as well, reducing or recognizing them for the glue work that they have to be able to do, providing inclusion, reducing the banter, that doesn't help enable them to do their job and work, and being transparent about, what do they need to do to get to the next level? What are they currently doing well? And how do you support them as a business, as a leader is extremely important. And that's what can really enable the teams and bring inclusion.
That's great. I think you covered a few points there, but kind of keen just to sort of wrap things up and talk about your three sort of main takeaways from just tonight's discussion. What are the things that you would like to particularly for listeners to take away from this discussion?
I think the first thing that I would say is, please do not let imposter syndrome stop you. You absolutely know what you're doing. You've got so far from working on yourself, despite whatever glass ceilings has been, whatever the barriers have been, you've gotten here. Just have your path straight, go towards it, do a lot of self-information, use your peers to be able to enable and help you. Do seek out mentorship, do seek out coaching, be on the path of whatever it takes to get to where you want to be. And so that's the key takeaway I want to be able to give women who want to be in product. And again, do negotiate. Absolutely do negotiate for what you think you're worth.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time and input on this topic, Deepika. Really enjoyed that discussion. I'd like now to hand back over to Doug for the next topic of discussion. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Hi, Jen. Thanks for that. And thanks again, Deepika. So I'm going to be covering ethnicity in product management. And I have some info again from the UK Tech Workplace Equality Report. Most tech workers in the UK identify as white, and in London it's evident that Asian and mixed race and multi-race people are better represented in tech than in the rest of the UK. However, black people are heavily underrepresented. 13% of London's population define themselves as black, but only 3% of the tech industry in London do. And women are more likely to come from non-white ethnicities than men. So again, why is this important? I've got two really, really good or really bad examples of the problems this can cause, really where global tech and media platforms have got this really, really wrong. In 2020, Twitter was found to be also cropping pictures of black faces in preference to white ones because the algorithm didn't recognize black faces. So if you were to tweet a picture of Serena Williams and a white opponent, Serena got cropped despite being the main draw. This happened also with Barack Obama, Tiger Woods, and other prominent black figures. Google also had a similar issue at around the same time, where it mislabeled black people with appropriate and often racist terms because it didn't recognize black faces. And this just, this not only has a huge impact on kind of people worldwide using the platform, but it also affects the company's employees. It affects their esteem. It also affects the company's reputation. And from a mercenary point of view, it affects companies' profits. And this is 3 years ago, so it's really difficult to understand how companies this size at the forefront got this wrong this recently. To help understand this better, we'd like to introduce Funmi Alassane. Funmi is the CPO of Together All. Hi, Funmi. Thanks for joining us. Perhaps you could introduce yourself and just give an audience a brief overview of your journey.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. So like Doug said, my name is Funmi Alassane. From my accent, you can tell I'm not British. I am Nigerian. I have lived here for about 14 years. So I came here as an adult and I came to study and stayed on. I have worked in the product space for over 10 years. So to Doug's point, I work at Together All as a chief product officer, where Together All is a digital mental health platform, and we create a space where people can connect and support each other. I think if I think about my time and my journey in product, maybe because I moved from Nigeria, where I was in a country where everyone was Black, and I didn't have to worry. I had a lot of things to worry about, but I didn't worry about being Black with Black people. Getting into the workforce, I had a very different approach. In pretty much all the companies I've worked at, it's been very culturally diverse. And I think because I was an adult, when I moved here, I had a different mentality, and there were things I didn't worry about. Like, I wasn't overly looking for things like racism, or unless it was explicit. And I had a really good experience, I have to say. But then one time in one of the companies I worked at, I had to stop and think, because I was talking to a group of people that were Black British, and they were explaining what they were experiencing. And it just seemed so strange to me. And I was just like, are you sure? Because that wasn't my experience. And then I realized that just because I was having a good experience did not mean that everyone else was having a good experience. And as I've gone through on my journey as a product person and now as a leader in product, every now and then I will talk to people who are from an ethnic minority group, and sometimes like they tell me about their experiences and they're just really puzzled, and I find it quite, sometimes it's humbling, sometimes it's saddening, sometimes it's surprising, and I keep thinking, what can we do, not necessarily even from a product perspective, but just when you think about ethnic minorities, like how do we make them feel a sense of belonging? How do you allow them to be themselves? Because when I think about it from a product lens, the beauty of having like a culturally diverse team, and I'm using the word culturally versus ethnic, is that there's that richness of ideas and thinking. And I'll give an example. So when I moved to Together All, one of the things I had to do was build my team from ground up. And I was so excited and proud to say that by the time we built the team, we were really culturally diverse. We made a joke that we had everyone from literally every continent apart from Antarctica, because we didn't know how to hire from there. But I do remember that someone on my team, Priyanka, a lovely girl, she moved into the country last year, and she moved from India. And I remember every time I had a conversation with her, I was always so excited because she just thought about things very differently. And I looked forward to catching up with her monthly, because it felt like I was talking to a peer. Like, she would think about a problem so differently, but not just because she was a wonderful designer, but she brought elements of her culture, her personal life, her experience, and a different understanding. And that's the richness you get when you have different people from different cultures.
Interesting. How about in the tech industry? A lot of people believe there's an ethnicity wage gap as well as a gender wage gap. 65% of non-white people believe there's an ethnicity pay gap, as opposed to 55% of white people. Have you thoughts or experience of that at all?
So, I mean, I would say for sure there is, and okay, there are different layers to your point. So you first start, let's just go, you start with a gender pay gap. And then within the gender pay gap, so I'm going to go like with women. I'm sure there are problems on the side of men, but within the gender pay gap, you also have like your ethnicity pay gap, and it's different for different groups. You know, some people at the bottom of the chain. And I guess just building on what Deepika said earlier, I kind of wonder to a large extent, like, how might we solve this problem? And I think the key thing is being transparent about wages. Because it's all well and good for us to say to people to negotiate, and I do encourage people to negotiate. But the thing is, to a large extent, what's your baseline that you're negotiating against? You don't really know. Sometimes you lock it, and sometimes it seems crazy. If a company was transparent, you kind of have a sense of where to start, because in most cases, like, there's a band, you know. Then on the flip side, as opposed to putting the onus on the person who should be negotiating, us as managers, for those of us who are thinking about the kind of world that we want to see, like, to a large extent, like, why are we, because as budget owners, you know what you have. And in some cases, especially with women, to a large extent, they might come in and go like, let's assume like you have a budget for 100K, just for illustration. A woman's talking to you and she's asking for 40 grand, but you have a budget of 100 and you would have been willing to pay 100. Why would you pay her 40 grand because she asked for 40 grand? She doesn't know any better, and you know she's not going to negotiate. However, but you're thinking about the savings. But in theory, this woman is going to do the same job that you would have paid 100 grand for. So if we're thinking about closing the gap, then to a large extent, we should be going like, well, actually, I will pay you what you're worth. Now, that's an ideal world. It doesn't happen that way, but it's us really thinking about from both sides, like, how can we close the gap? We don't have to be talking about, I would hope that in the future, we're not talking about the gender pay gap or an ethnicity pay gap. We're talking about people are paid fairly, we're transparent, and we can justify why people are paid what they're paid.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've obviously, as recruiters, we cover negotiation all the time. And there's a body of evidence out there, a substantial body of evidence that says when you put the onus to negotiate on a traditionally underpaid minority, you're just perpetuating the cycle. You know,
Exactly.
and people should be paid for the job. A job has a skill requirement. The pay should be level regardless if the person meets that requirement and that bar. Yeah,
I do agree with you, and I do think, and that's why I feel it's both sides. So if you think about it, when we talk about transparency, my preference is we live in a world where what we're negotiating is saying like the band is 80 grand to 100, and what the person is negotiating is where they sit in the 80 grand in that band. To a large extent, you've given them a baseline, and then you're having an honest conversation as to if the person thinks they should be getting 100 grand, why you think they're getting, I don't know, 80 or 85, and how and when they might move towards the upper limit of that band. But that's not where we are right now.
Yeah, so you're thinking about competence-based, linking competence and skills, measurable competencies to salary benchmarks, whereas so often it's subjective, i.e. my salary is already 80, therefore I must have 90, as opposed to, you think we should take that away?
I mean, it does depend, right? Because it's negotiation, right? So to a large extent, you can come in and tell me like, well, I am on 80. And if you're starting at 80 and the range takes me all the way to like 100, like I want 90, why would I leave my 80K job to come to another 80K job? Like, what's in it for me? But I think that the thing where I'm going to with this is it's a realistic style negotiation, not where the person feels like they're winning, but you know in your heart they're not winning. You're still saving and you're still negotiating with them. And in some cases, in some companies, like you're still negotiating the 40 grand with this person when you have all that money.
Yeah.
And it's not so much about the actual money, but it's that whole thing where every year we get these reports about, oh, like the gap keeps getting wider, and we all talk about how sad it is. But then what can we do as owner of the budget? What can we do as responsible businesses to close the gap? Like actionable things, not enough for us to talk about it. It's like, let's do something about it. And until we decide to do something about it, unfortunately, it's going to keep getting wider.
Yeah, okay. And moving on to actual discrimination, is this, it's quite a personal question, but is this something you've ever felt or experienced directly? Or I guess perhaps feeling you've not been taken as seriously as you should have been because of ethnicity or gender?
No, actually, I haven't experienced that. And I feel quite blessed to say like I haven't experienced that. In all of my time, so I've had a really amazing journey in my time in the UK, and I feel it's a combination of things. I know I've worked as hard as I can to be where I am, but there's also an element where I feel like I've just been blessed along the line and been favored. So I've gone on a pretty good path. And what I mean by that is in all of my time, I've had really amazing mentors. I've had coaches. I've had executive sponsors. So in most of the roles I've been in, there's always been someone who has taken an interest and done a lot of sponsoring for me. But then, like I said, I know like that's not everyone's experience. I know that because I talk to people and they tell me about the discrimination they face as product people, but I haven't quite experienced that.
Yeah, obviously, and it's lovely to hear if you haven't experienced it. It's good to hear people who've had positive experiences. But would you say then that a good thing for people who are in minority ethnic backgrounds to look to seek to get a mentor, to seek coaching? Again, this is something Deepika touched on very heavily. And how would you go about doing that? How do you get a sponsor in an organization?
Actually, it's a great question, because I actually put that down as points to make sure I mention this. I do think that it's very important for people that are associated with various ethnicities in corporations or in organizations or in businesses to have some form of mentoring, to have some form of coaching. I think exec sponsoring, and I caveat that, is super important, because the difference with exec sponsoring is more often than not, it's your work that speaks for you. Because when an exec sponsor puts your name out, they're also putting their name out.
Yes.
So it's like the results it's pretty much about the results that you drive. Yeah. Now, mentoring, coaching, and getting a sponsor or being sponsored, they're not mutually exclusive, right? Because to a large extent, the coaching is helping you improve, and then hopefully that's driving like an output. But if I flip it, for those who are exec sponsoring, there could be an intentionality where you kind of go like, well, actually, we want to have like a more diverse team. So I'll be intentional about looking for people who are from an ethnic diverse group to see the opportunity to exec sponsor them. If I sense like there isn't anyone, then is there an opportunity to identify someone who could be a potential rising star, that could be coached, that could be mentored? Like you have to be quite intentional about these things. Like, how do you move them along the way?
Yeah, it's interesting. So you're actually saying a lot of the onus should be on the organization, a bit like the salaries and the transparency. Put the onus on the organization as opposed to solely on the individual.
I think it's two-sided. So there's an element. So this is a bit where, from the leader, from the business, you're doing something about it. From the individual, like there is an opportunity to ask for help. There is an opportunity to identify people that can mentor you. There is an opportunity to seek coaches, and there's an element of peer support. But also the thing I'll say as well is, from a coaching, like when you're asking for help, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone from the same group that you're in. It doesn't have to be someone that's the same gender. And this is what I mean. In my time, some of the coaching I've received, some of the mentoring I've received have not been from women, they've been from men. Now, it's not necessarily because I needed to find a man or I needed to find a woman. It was whoever was available. I got the help from.
You.
Yeah. But I mean, that being said, there are times that I feel like as an ethnic minority or like someone from a diverse group, you should look for someone who is familiar with what your experience is, who understands some of the cultural nuances, but someone who has walked the path ahead of you. Because that way, when you're explaining what you're experiencing or when you're asking for help, they understand exactly where the opportunities are for you to grow, and they understand exactly how to support you. So they've seen it from both sides.
Yeah, totally. So, okay, so you're saying really from the corporate side or the business side, there has to be something intentional, and you've got to create the opportunity where those who would like to step forward or have mentoring have the opportunity, or sponsorship, they have the opportunity. And this, I think, is what we talk about when we talk about inclusivity, isn't it? It's creating an environment where people can be the best version of themselves, and they have access to the tools that, I probably just have and have had. There's always been people that look like me when I sort of work. So it's just creating that environment where everybody has that, and those that choose to use them can and can do so easily.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Are there other things we can do? Are there other positive actions we can take, do you believe? So there's a couple of things like we hear about, and we have some clients do, like bias training, blind hiring. We've touched on reviews and promotions being competence-based. Do you have a view on any of those? Good, bad?
I think the piece around bias training, that's super important, because everyone has bias one way or the other. And bias can be good and bias can be bad. Where bias is bad is when you're not aware of your bias.
Yeah.
So if anything, what the bias training is doing is helping you identify what your biases are, and then you can act accordingly. With things like blind hiring, I don't think they're a good or a bad thing. It depends on what you're trying to achieve with like blind hiring, because it's got pros and cons, right? You can go blind if you're saying like you want to build a more ethnically or culturally diverse team. Blind hiring might not be the way to go about it, because do you know what I mean? Like you're not necessarily like, how do you know? So what if I was blind hiring and then I'm like, oh, all these profiles look great and they're all like white people. Then what do? I keep bringing more white people in. That's not the way to go about it. Also, you're going to say,
yeah. Well, I think that's that's an interesting one, because if you don't live in a diverse area, how do you? That's a funneling issue, and that's I think when an organisation, it has to look to itself and just say, look, okay, if I don't live in a diverse area, I can't just run with the status quo. How do I attract diversity? Because if you're not in, and it's about being intentional again.
Yeah.
Because diverse people are there, you just have to look for them.
So I think the thing is, like from an ethnic diverse point of view, if I was trying to get like a diverse pool of candidates, I would not go through your generic. I wouldn't go blind hiring. I'll be quite intentional. I would say to a recruiter, I would love to, like, I never feel my team. I don't start with saying like I must have one Black person, one white person, one. It's just like I want diversity. But if anything, when you're sending people my way, I would love to see a mix. I don't want to see all white men. I don't want to see all Black women. I want to see a mix, and then we go through the funnel. Now, coming back to blind hiring, it has its place, and I do think it does have some value, because you might have a reason where you go like, well, actually, maybe I'm aware of my bias. Maybe I hire people that are always from Imperial because I went to Imperial. So at this point, I don't want to do that. But the thing about blind hiring that we need to be mindful of is it allows for that first stage of getting people through the door. It takes away some of your biases. But then that's just the start of the journey. How do you make sure your biases don't kick in through the stages? So it's an interesting one.
And what's your view on that? Because but bias training is it's a polemic topic, and there's a lot of reaction about it. But we did some tests recently, actually, and of course, we were all horrified at the biases we hold, because they're unintentional and they're not, it's not a result of actually being consciously prejudiced. It's just the way the media or society has has programmed you to look at things. So for me, sort of bias awareness and training it allows you to be conscious and intentional in what you do and to understand and self-correct. But is that, when you say, is awareness enough? Do you think there should be ongoing training? If so, how often?
That's a great question. I don't think I have a sensible answer to that. I think training without an action plan is a waste of time and money. I feel the first thing you're trying to do when you have either a conscious or unconscious bias training is to make people aware of the biases. Yeah. So now you're aware, then what? What does that mean in practical terms? How do you ensure like you're not leaning into your biases the wrong way? Or in some cases, maybe you're intentional about it, but what's your rationale? So let's say you're intentional about it. I might go like, my team is predominantly white. And I intend to hire some Black people or people from other cultures because I want to mix things up. At this point, I'm biased towards that group.
Yeah.
Which means like there are some people. So if I was hiring and I had to pull off like 100, and I'm like, no, this is what I'm going for. So I recognize my bias, but I'm leaning towards it and I'm being intentional, but I can rationalize why I'm biased that way.
Yeah.
Now, if I get to a point where I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool, I'm just going to keep hiring like more Black people and more Black people and more Black people, then maybe there's a problem in that path. So I think going back to where I started, I think one, you're aware, then the question is like, first of all, why was the need for that training? Now that you're aware, what do you want to do about it? And how do you make sure that you're not leaning into your bias negatively? And how do you make sure that whether you say your bias is for good or for bad, another group is not suffering the long term? Because once you lean, that's the whole idea. One group will always feel treated unfairly.
Yeah, I mean, but it's progress, not perfection, right?
Yeah. So it's just like
Yeah.
And I'm not against so to my point, I'm not against like constant training. It's just making sure like there is a clear action plan.
Yeah. So what about, so you talked about an action plan, and this is why I like talking to product people as well. What about data? Where does data come into this? Because it makes sense, I guess, if you think there's a problem, what's the data? Should we be reviewing hiring and promotion stats? Should we be analyzing the gaps? Should we be forcing change as businesses? And I mean, it's fairly easy to do in a small company because you can kind of look around the room and you've got the data there. But big companies, should we be forcing them to analyze and publish data? And should we be pushing and saying, yeah, that's not good enough? Like we do with the gender pay gap to a degree. There's it's published, it's open, and there's legislation and societal pressure that says you're not good enough. This isn't good enough yet, Yeah,
I do. I think so. I do. I would say that to a large extent, I think most companies have that data.
Yeah.
I think there's a danger of sharing data without a clear narrative as to what's going on. So I'll give an example. The piece with I think where you kind of go like 3% of like women, I think CEO exec are like Black. When you hear that, you're instantly irritated. Like, I'm just like, that is so annoying. But the thing is, you have to go back. How did we get there? And it didn't start from there. It starts from like entry stage and when people are dropping off. So I think it's just being mindful, because you can look at the data and go like, oh my goodness, like there's like 3% of this group have not been promoted. But without the right narrative, you don't know if it's a good or a bad thing or what the opportunities are. So I would go like, yes, the data points should be reviewed quite regularly. And I think a lot of companies, or at least every company I've worked at, they review that data. But then what story is the data telling you? Like what questions are you trying to answer? And off the back of that, then you have a clear plan. So if you went like, well, actually, we've noticed that all the Black people have not been promoted in 10 years at the same level forever, then that's a compelling to like, why is that happening? Yeah. So I just feel it just needs like a solid narrative.
Yeah, so that narrative's important because you're right, and I agree. Sometimes you can read something and you just think, well, that's shocking, shameful, irritating, whatever. But and we do kind of quite a lot of search assignments sometimes, and often so you're doing a search, it's an exec level hire, and there may be a D&I component. So we've had, for example, must have a female CPO for a certain hire. Now, the problem isn't the environment today, because across our business, I think about 48% of our placements are females in product, because it's socially progressive, etc. But the problem is that 20, 30 years ago, there were women in STEM. Therefore, the number of CPOs you get now, it's tiny. And I mean, we had one search that was ridiculous, where I think we ended up with there were actually only 6 candidates with the industry skills and knowledge that were needed that were female, and there was thousands of guys for it. So the narrative is important, and I guess understanding is better now than it was. And it's, again, I always think progress, not perfection. It's iterative. Yeah.
And just to build on that, though, I think the thing to remember is, because I experienced that when I was trying to hire engineers, I'm like, I want female engineers in the pool, and the poor recruiter was just like, there are none, like they've tried. But I think if you look at McKinsey, they do this report every year, women in the workplace. Then if we feel like, well, actually, at the top level, we don't have enough people, then the question is like, how do we work backwards and make sure that the people that come in are moving through the funnel? Because a lot of women and people from ethnic diverse group, they drop off along the line. So like, how do we make sure that leaky bucket is plugged? Like, where does the problem lie and how do we support them? And then hopefully, if we don't have them in senior roles right now, we're planning for the next few years.
Yeah, and that's back down to some of the topics Jen and Deepika were touching on, such as getting women back after childbirth, for example. And again, it's about having an inclusive environment where when people of colour join an organisation, they feel valued, they feel welcomed, they can have a mentor, they have a sponsor, they understand that the opportunities are there, and they don't just give up and think, well, okay, I'll just go elsewhere then. So what would you say the key things are then, I guess, to look at, to create an inclusive environment for women of colour particularly? Are there 2 or 3 main takeaways that we can sort of give the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with the obvious. If there are opportunities to mentor them, to coach them, to exec sponsor them, please, by all means, we should do that, because that's how we keep them in and enable them to grow and thrive. I also think that there is an opportunity for more role models to step out, because I think the more they see people like them, the more they aspire. And even more importantly, the third is creating an environment where they feel a sense of belonging, where they can be their true selves, because that's how they can thrive.
Great. And I think the media has a lot to do with this as well. Have you a view on that? Sort of media representation, making an effort to promote people, lift people up, ensure visibility?
I don't know if it's the media. I'll say something very quickly. Until recently, before I joined Chief, I used to say, when people ask me about women that inspire me, or if I'm in a situation, I would say, I wonder what Elizabeth McCord would do. Now, I had to stop myself, because Elizabeth McCord is an actress in a show called Madam Secretary. So I'm like thinking about what an actress would do. And I'm like, surely there are real role models that I should be able to think about, to go like, what would they do in this situation? Now I've found, being a part of Chief, there's so many women that inspire me. I'm like, oh my goodness, like there are loads of women doing great things. How do we help other women see women like this? So I don't know how we might be able to elevate them, so people know where to find women to inspire them.
Yeah, Chief's good, actually, from what we've seen of it. I think all of our panel members tonight are members of, but we've seen a lot on LinkedIn. Do you want to give a 60-second intro? I think we've got a couple of minutes before Jen comes back.
So I think the best I'll say from a blog point of view is Shift is this network that brings together women in leadership position to support each other and grow together. And it's predominantly founders, C-suite, VP level women. And they launched in the UK this year.
Okay. And have you found it personally useful?
It's been pretty amazing. Deepika talked about peer support. Deepika and I met through Chief, and we're in the same group. So we do a lot of peer supporting, and it's really valuable in that sense.
Great. Well, I think, is there anything else you wanted to touch on, or should we?
No, I mean, I think one of the things I'm quite keen to do is to pay it forward to people from my community and people from minority groups. So if you're on this call and you feel you might benefit from a call, or you want to find out a bit about my journey, I think I can support you, please ping me on LinkedIn.
That's really nice of you. That's really kind of you. And thank you so much for today. So I think we're now going to move to the final section of the roundtable, which is how does D&I impact on business performance? So if I could hand back to you, Jen. And again, Funmi, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Doug. And thanks, Funmi. That was really interesting. Love that. So as Doug mentioned, moving on now to discuss the importance of diversity against business performance. And I think generally this is probably less spoken about, so keen to spark discussions around this topic. We all know the moral importance of driving equality and equity within tech businesses, and the formula of diversity inclusion equals improved business performance seems obvious and simple. But actually, how does it work? We'll be looking to unpick this further today. We've seen with our clients in the tech industry, there is also a company culture importance in that inclusivity helps to drive morale, job satisfaction, and commitment to the job, which also helps companies to grow and scale. We've done a few recent podcasts on the importance of D&I when hiring in product and marketing, and it's clear that D&I drives innovation. Embracing diversity and fostering inclusion embeds friction into our decision-making, enabling us to challenge ourselves. This can ultimately lead to building better products and products that are being built by the society in which we live and products that are relevant and useful for the target markets. With regards to D&I versus financial performance, I wanted to highlight McKinsey's Diversity Matters report, which states that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity are 15% more likely to outperform industry competitors, and those in the top quartile for ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to outperform competitors. These figures kind of speak for themselves here on this one. In the UK, greater gender diversity on the senior executive team corresponded to the highest performance uplift in the data set. For every 10% increase in gender diversity, profits rose by 3.5%. Some other articles that are worth a read are Deloitte's Waiter, Is That Inclusion in My Soup? A New Recipe to Improve Business Performance. This report looks at the metrics behind individual employee performance. This covers employees' ability to innovate, team collaboration, and responsiveness to changing customer needs, which I know in product management is key to building the best products in the market. Given the higher returns that diversity is expected to bring in the tech sector, we believe it is best to invest now, since winners will pull further ahead and others will naturally fall further behind. So moving on, I'm really keen to get some wider thoughts on this, which brings me on nicely to introducing our next speaker, Pooja Naidu, who is currently Senior Product Director at Muse. Hey Pooja, please do tell us your story and why you're keen to get involved in this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Jen. I've really enjoyed listening to my colleagues. I know them, their thoughts and your stats as well were fantastic. But good evening all, and thank you so much for having me on here. I'm really happy to be here tonight because it's a topic that I feel very passionately about and don't get to speak about enough. But firstly, a little bit about me. You asked me to introduce myself. I have over, gosh, it's quite frightening to say really, over 25 years worth of experience in tech and product and worked on a variety of roles in many different industries with some of the big brands in the UK as well as globally. From startups to scale ups to larger corporates, you name it, I've been in quite a few industries. And outside of work life, it's always nice to talk about this. I am a mother to two beautiful boys who keep me busy to no end. But why am I here? I guess I wanted to just say, look, I'm not an expert in the field, but having worked in so many of the organizations that I've worked in, and having seen, I guess, what worked and what didn't, and what pitfalls there were and what great learnings there were as well, maybe I could impart some of that knowledge here today. So thank you for having me, Jen.
Absolutely. You're welcome, and I'm absolutely sure you can and will. So to begin the discussion, I'll be keen to understand your thoughts and experiences around how diversity and inclusion links to business performance, and if you kind of ever encountered any stumbling blocks along the way.
Yeah, I mean, where to begin? Shall I start with the stumbling blocks? Because that might set the scene a little bit. Many moons ago, as a computer science graduate, I was probably one of 3 women amongst 120 men on my course at that time. And I realized very, very early on, I had to work smarter, not necessarily always harder. And you can imagine there was a lot of fierce competition on a daily basis. So that sort of set the stage for me. And throughout my career, and this is a difficult topic to talk about, I have sadly witnessed the underestimation of women and the lack of awareness around unconscious bias, which made me, every step of that journey, doubt my ability to perform in many senior roles that I've had. So just a few examples. In the past, I've been passed over for promotion because I was going on mat leave twice with my 2 boys, being told by male colleagues that I was only successful in getting said promotion because I was a woman and it helped the company's diversity quota as well. So this really made me question my abilities and my merits, and quickly I realized that actually, no, I got the job on my merits. And also a couple of the collaborators today have talked about this, but being paid less than my male counterparts for the same roles, and knowing that, that was difficult. And more recently, when being headhunted or sought out on LinkedIn, for example, just being actively told by some recruiters that the company was looking for a diversity hire and I had a fine chance, it just didn't sit right with me, and it still doesn't feel right to be seen that way. And D&I, just the last point on this, DE&I was not a thing in the past as I've gone through these 25 years. It's very recently that I've really felt it, and companies are taking an active role in doing something about this and making it better. So now the advice I give to anyone, and I do this now when I seek my next role, I really research into the way the company lives and breathes, especially around DE&I and the drive. It's really important to me. And coming into Muse very recently, I've only been here for about 3.5 months. I was so pleasantly surprised by the diverse workforce that we have. Although tech does remain a challenge, we've spoken about that earlier, same as in outside of our industry as well. And even though I'm the only female leader in the R&D leadership team, I was delighted to learn that everyone I spoke to, from the founders to leadership to my bosses, etc., it was a continuously want and need for changing that status quo and embracing D&I. Mm-hmm. And our goals and targets definitely aren't just a tick boxing exercise, but actually we're going to stay quite deliberate and intentional in these efforts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Pooja. And I really appreciate your honesty and openness about that. And sorry to hear the experiences you mentioned about being passed on promotion due to going on mat leave. Can I ask if you're okay to talk about how you overcame that? I think for the audience today that might resonate with a few people. If you're happy to talk about how you overcame that and continue to progress in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about the topic of imposter syndrome, and that's always prevalent somewhere lurking in the back. But the way that I get over it is I have been given a seat at the table, and I need to continuously tell myself that I didn't get to where I am without all these things that have happened and all these learnings. And actually, they've made me stronger. And, one thing I would say, Jen, is about, I've always had to learn, as I said earlier on, to work smarter and not harder in some cases. So for everyone out there that's gone through these journeys, you are where you are because you've been through that journey. You've been through those learnings. They've made you stronger. And remember, you have a seat at that table.
Yeah. And you sort of mentioned, kind of if you were to sort of join a new business, as you've recently joined Muse in the last few months, and you said you're really pleased with the diverse culture there. For people that are perhaps looking to move on and find a new role, how would you recommend, how do you assess how diverse a company is, perhaps when you're interviewing, if you've got any tips for that around that at all?
Yeah, I think you can ask these questions, in the hiring process. It's really important because remember, it's not the hiring process, that candidate process and that hiring manager process and all the panelists that you meet, or whatever shape that interview takes. Remembering that this is as much about you as a candidate as it is about the company. So ask for those facts and figures. Ask to be put in touch with the HR department or someone who's looking after DE&I. I've asked for interviews in the past, post what was already set out for me, because I wanted to understand the other parts of the business or the culture and, verify whether what I'd seen so far really resonated or not. So don't be afraid to ask. Do your research, your own research as well. It's really important. Quite a lot of companies are quite, they put these stats out, etc. Have a look at those, but you won't get what you need, I think, until you actually ask the right questions during that hiring process.
Got it. Ask the questions. Absolutely. And so, there's a growing understanding that D&I is important, not just morally, but also to business performance. But there does seem to be a bit of disconnect between knowing the importance versus knowing how to actually implement a strategy. So can I ask how you think we should, we should implement these changes? Everyone knows change is hard. Not everyone likes change, but, it's really important that we're able to implement these changes. So where do we start with this, Pooja?
Should we talk, because there's two prongs to that, right? Well, firstly, let's talk about why it's important in terms of a company's success. And then maybe I could go into the strategy a bit more. So all companies, I believe, should understand that DE&I does have a massive impact on their organization and their success metrics, and certainly if they want to survive. I read a stat the other day that if the global workforce, and this is just about gender diversity, if the global workforce became equally gender diverse by 2030, global GDP could increase by 13 trillion, according to McKinsey. That is huge. But ultimately, for me, I think in every organization, a diverse workforce is a smarter workforce. So inviting that diversity of thought, that thinking, those talent pools really can transform and future-proof that company. So, and I truly believe that diversity, this notion of diversity breaks our society, etc. I've heard that so many times. Actually, no, it enriches it. It's proven in the stats that this has a positive knock-on effect. But let's talk about some of the elements of how, perhaps, right? Number one, I'd say, obviously, it's about the financial performance. So I think someone mentioned this earlier on the call as well. Diverse teams are better placed to understand the diverse needs of customers, leading to increased revenue and profitability. Secondly, the reputation and the brand image. So asking as a candidate in your hiring process, how do you take DE&I seriously? Are you taking it seriously? Companies that take this seriously benefit from that really great reputation for customers, as I've mentioned, but also don't think that it's just customers, right? It is about the investors looking to give funding to these organizations as well, and those investors who value DE&I and social responsibility. Another obvious one is around employee engagement and retention. So having, we've talked about this today as well, but having a DE&I strategy is one thing, but actually executing upon it and making all those people that you have attracted into your organization feel included, welcomed, and respect is another. It's a whole other game. And the other unseen part, I guess, is, there are things like flexible working conditions. I never thought about that before as part of DE&I, but actually it's a part of this strategy too. So once you get that D part done, it's about equity and inclusion, and you must have a strategy equally around all three. And then, we've talked about decision making and diversified thoughts. Wider range of experiences come to the table, ideas come to the table, different perspectives. And we can then adapt as an organization to the ever-changing needs of those customers, but also market conditions around us. So I think it's got so many benefits. And we've talked a lot about diversity in products, right? If everyone was exactly the same, how would this impact your products? All of a sudden, with diversity, your products become more innovative. They're diverse in their thinking. I mean, we've walked through a few examples from Google, but do you remember in the past, phones were built by men for men. They were not suitable for the hands of women. And even their physical keypads were spaced far apart. So a diverse workforce, as a summary, is integral to building and thinking about diversified products as well.
Absolutely. And you have covered a few of these points already, Pooja, but what do you think constitutes a good D&I strategy in your opinion?
Yeah, and look, these are my thoughts from what I've seen them in the past and what I'm seeing today as well. I think a really good strategy, and I mentioned it just now, doesn't just focus on the D part, but also prioritizing a welcoming and inclusive environment for employees for all backgrounds and walks of life, and providing those equal opportunities at growth at all levels of the organization are so important. And here I can talk to some of the key ingredients, but for the strategy, for I guess someone who's maybe even starting out or thinking about this, but actually trying to create awareness around their organization. And then I've also got some thoughts around how do you start as well. So some of the things that I've seen that work really well are getting that real strong commitment from leadership to prioritize and invest this at the company strategy level. And within OKRs or whatever other goals you employ at strategy level at that company level. But the commitment isn't just around the implementation. It's just as important to have the execution side as well. And this has got to be an ongoing initiative. There needs to be clear, transparent communication backed by actions and resources. You need resources to put towards this. I think the second thing is around education and awareness. And this goes from everyone in the organization, right? Whether it's employees or leadership, and of course, the talent and recruitment teams as well. The talent and recruitment teams are essentially your window to success in hiring diverse pipelines. But hiring managers also need this encouragement as well. So this takes me to, I guess, the training element of it. Make training fun, relatable, and interesting, practical rather than theoretical. How many times have you been asked to take training at work and been really dread around that? Make it relatable. I heard someone the other day who said they had a role play day around DE&I. That's amazing. That's fun. And then, of course, let's touch upon those recruitment and retention efforts get a proactive approach in place, right? It might be that your job descriptions might need to change, your adverts might need to change, your recruitment strategies might need to change as a result. So don't just think about attracting more diverse candidates, but provide training and support for those underrepresented groups as well. And I think ERGs are really important, Jen. We have quite a few. So if anyone doesn't know, those are employee resource groups. They really help drive and make meaningful change in organizations, whether it's mental health awareness or DE&I as well. So we're employing a load of those. And I think, lastly, the ongoing measuring of that impact, set clear goals, track that progress, and continue to challenge that status quo. Demographic data analysis, employee surveys, inclusive cultural changes and impacts. So overall, strategy needs to be comprehensive, flexible, ever evolving. It's not a one-time project, and integrated to that entire org. And I think those that starting out or perhaps earlier on the journey, number one, commit to DE&I as a core value. Number two, conduct an audit, use it as a baseline, and then focus on the right factors. And then get that training sorted across the entire organization to actually make meaningful progress.
Yeah. I mean, some awesome tips there for companies, how they can really implement the DE&I strategy. Just kind of going back, we touched on it a little bit initially, but how does DE&I have a direct impact on the company's successes, and why? And you know, sort of talk through that one example there. But have you got any other examples or experiences you might be able to share about, you know, how implementing a strategy, and DE&I strategy, can have an instant impact on company successes, and why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think we've touched on quite a lot of these points, but I would say one of the biggest factors for me that actually came about was this whole customer and investor attraction piece. I never thought about that from someone looking to fund your investment or fund a startup or from Series A to B to C. I never thought about that before, up until recently, where I thought actually you can actually have a detrimental impact on your funding if you haven't employed DE&I for an investor that really cares about this. And I think the other things that I'll just talk about again are just the employee engagement and satisfaction, the recruitment and the retention of those employees. At the end of the day, if you think about it, it's harder to acquire new employees than it is to retain the ones you've got, right? So you've got to do something right around that inclusivity, that equity, the E part of DE&I. And it's not just about, bringing in these pipelines, do something about them. And then I think the other strand that I thought about the other day, which had never occurred to me before as well, was think about your suppliers, right? Companies can also measure their impacts by tracking their spending with suppliers and underrepresented groups as well. And in turn, the other way, the supplier's social responsibility, the way that they think about D&I, do they want to work with a company that takes it seriously or doesn't have it on their agenda at all? So I'm hoping that through the few areas I've mentioned, there's some nuggets in there around some different thinking, not just about what's in the organization, but actually the external factors that might impact your longevity as an organization in the first place as well.
Absolutely. And, we've heard a lot about the effect of DE&I on McKinsey's Insight report, diversity wins, how inclusion matters. And as I mentioned earlier, but these despite these figures, we know there's still a slow progress towards DE&I goals in most businesses. And, kind of looking at sort of notes here, the commitment from leadership, education and awareness, really being able to kind of create that inclusive environment. Mm-hmm. But as I said, it is still fairly slow progress out there in tech. So, yeah, why do you think that is? What more can we do?
It's a shame, isn't it? But I think it's probably a combination of a few factors. So I think one could be around resistance to change, or that lack of awareness and education piece, but also the fear of this unknown territory that perhaps you've not thought about before, or not knowing where to even begin, and understanding the ROI and the benefits as I've described them as well. The other could be around the lack of commitment. I talked about leadership commitment, but the lack of prioritization at a company vision and strategy level. Feeling that you need to bring in experts to help, there's costs associated with it, and a lack of understanding on that ROI. So I think that kind of inhibits a few leaders perhaps in taking this seriously as well. And I think the last few points are around, probably we've talked a lot about this, but unconscious biases, but biases in general. So if there is a lack of education around this and awareness, the workforce will have their biases. And when you're hiring or attracting new talent, the notion will be that we should just bring in people like us, right? Let's just bring in people exactly like us. It's worked so well in the past, and we don't know any different. And then lastly, I think it's about lack of accountability, transparency, and how to report this to stakeholders. So I think it's really a mix of internal factors and external factors. And companies need to realize, I think this is the only motivation I'm going to give out there right now on this topic, is that it's not as difficult as you think as it is. So just get started, make mistakes, be intentional and learn along the way, right? We're all humans, we make mistakes. And I think it's the learnings that you take from those mistakes to that next round, which are more important.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, super thorough, and really appreciate your insight on that, Pooja. Great to hear. So, any other sort of thoughts you'd like to share, and if you're able to cover sort of any key takeaways here, do you think?
I mean, look, the everything so far has been fantastic, and I feel like all the topics have intermingled quite a bit. But if the callers are not, didn't pay attention to anything I've just said, but just remembering a few things to take away, I will give them these 3 things. If you're looking to make a start, talk about this, get it on your organizational agenda, and remember, it's not a one-time project or an afterthought. It needs to be ingrained in the heartbeat and the DNA of the organization. That's super important. And that goes anywhere from its existing employees to new joiners to implementing a strategy as you would with any other initiative. We have product strategy, we have company strategy. It's just a strategy as any other in your organization. I think the second point I'd like to make is remember that D&I is exactly as it says on the tin. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not enough to just attract those pool of employees, but ensuring that we're equitable and very inclusive towards those employees once they're with us is just as important. And I've never thought about flex working practices, but actually things like that can make a huge difference in someone's journey with you as well, and in retention as well. And then lastly, a diverse workforce does have a direct impact on your company's performance, your products, your customers, and your investors. Simply put, this is my mantra now: diverse workforces equal diverse products for diverse audiences, and increase your reputation with those investors who seek out organizations that pay importance to all of this as well. And the last thing left to say is really thank you to you all, and thank you to you, Jen and Doug, but also my close allies, Deepika and Funmi. And I think that we've brought up some wonderful topics today, and I've learned a lot. And I think that they've all interrelated, which is nice to see.
Absolutely. Honestly, thoroughly enjoyed that insight from you all. We thank you so much for your time today, and joining us and having these conversations, and hoping we can raise the awareness, and hopefully our audience has enjoyed the topics we've covered today. So thank you, Pooja. And I will hand back to Doug to wrap things up.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Pooja. And yeah, thanks to everybody for joining tonight, particularly Deepika, Funmi and Pooja. It's really, really good to share your time. And for me, I think the key takeaway I've heard that, it has been quite intersectional. There has been a common theme, and the main one I think is to be intentional. That seems to be the hot take. So some food for thought there. We'll have a recording of this for the audience. We've got a recording on our website, intelligentpeople.co.uk, and we're here to help. If anybody needs any support finding a new role, market information, or of course hiring, please do just reach out to Jen or I. We'll also be running a series of these, so we hope to see you all again soon. And I think with that, we're wrapping it up. Thanks again.
Thanks all.